For 2 centuries, the dominant political debate has centered on a single question: who owns the means of production, capitalism or socialism? But this binary argument misses a far more urgent reality. It ignores the physical constraints of production itself. Every economic action is a process of transforming natural resources into usable goods, and ultimately into waste. This process isn't governed by ideology, it is governed by physics, specifically the first law of thermodynamics, which dictates absolute limits on material throughput, and the second law, the irreversible creep of entropy. Looking at these abandoned ship hulls stranded in a sterile desert, we see the physical evidence of a system's metabolic demand outpacing its ecological substrate. When modern industrial engines obsess over maximizing output, they rapidly consume low-entropy natural capital and leave behind high-entropy waste. The flaw in our modern architecture is the pursuit of infinite quantitative growth, the impossible expansion of material throughput on a finite planet. The alternative is qualitative development, improving human well-being while operating strictly within a fixed, sustainable metabolic scale. Designing sustainable organizations is not a matter of applying subjective human morality. It is a matter of aligning with non-negotiable physical laws. This alignment requires a rigorous methodology. The KOSMOS Framework provides exactly that. Instead of inventing new rules, it extracts engineering logic from 3.8 billion years of evolutionary research, translating biological success into a mathematical toolkit. At the core of this framework are the 8 fundamental design principles, or FDPs. Think of these as nature's source code. They are quantifiable heuristics that measure both the operational resilience and the ethical integrity of any system. Because these principles audit the underlying physical architecture of an organization, they expose the fatal weaknesses hidden behind standard corporate sustainability reports. We are going to map these biophysical formulas, dismantle the structural illusions of mainstream ESG metrics, and trace the direct mathematical line between extractive design and systemic collapse. If human institutions are going to survive the coming century, they must be engineered using the exact same logic that sustains life itself. This diagram maps the 4 axioms of universal computation: non-trivial processing, persistent state, optimization, and recursion. These are the bedrock constraints that any system must navigate to avoid decay. When biological systems successfully solve for these axioms, they generate 8 distinct evolutionary strategies. These are the fundamental design principles. Take symbiotic purpose. This formula measures the ratio of benefits delivered to all stakeholders versus the benefits extracted by a controlling subset. A system that extracts value rather than exchanging it degrades its own substrate. Or closed-loop materiality. This quantifies the ratio of recycled outputs against total material throughput. If a system generates waste faster than it can be reassimilated, it suffocates its own environment. Adaptive resilience measures a system's capacity to absorb stress and self-correct. High-functioning systems do this autonomously, without relying on external coercion or rigid top-down enforcement. This requires distributed agency. By decentralizing decision-making power, the system avoids the brittleness of a single central point of failure, enabling rapid adaptation across its entire network. These formulas are not an idealized moral checklist. They are the strict thermodynamic prerequisites for preventing decay. When we apply this KOSMOS scorecard to modern corporate architectures, the vulnerabilities become highly visible. Let's compare Patagonia on the left with Amazon and Tesla on the right, scoring them based on the FDP formulas. Patagonia averages an 8.9 out of 10. Their structural revenue sharing directly satisfies the symbiotic purpose formula, while their aggressive garment recycling program ensures high marks for closed-loop materiality. Now look at Amazon's time-off task algorithm. It scores a 0 for adaptive resilience. The system possesses no capacity to self-correct. It relies entirely on rigid, punitive logic and constant external enforcement to maintain output. Tesla averages a 3.9 overall. It is heavily penalized in emergent transparency, deliberately withholding crucial safety data regarding its autopilot systems. This photograph captures the physical reality of a reciprocal ethics failure. Tesla's supply chain relies on cobalt mining, a process that extracts immense value at the direct physical and environmental expense of the local participants. Biomimetic structures build intrinsic anti-fragility. Unnatural systems depend entirely on extraction to survive, rendering them mathematically vulnerable to failure. If these corporate systems are structurally flawed, why do they frequently receive high marks on mainstream ESG indexes or align with UN Sustainable Development Goals? The error lies in the architecture of ESG itself. It treats environmental, social, and governance factors as isolated pillars, but ecological reality operates as a continuous, interconnected web. As these pillars shatter, they reveal a complex network underneath. A company can secure a high governance rating simply by having an independent board of directors, even while it systematically excludes its workforce from decision-making. The ESG model rewards the surface metric while ignoring the fatal lack of distributed agency underneath. We see a similar abstraction in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Looking at this grid, the goals are presented as neat, compartmentalized boxes. They are the result of geopolitical compromise, not biophysical blueprints. This leads to deep structural contradictions. SDG 8, for instance, simultaneously demands decent work and continuous economic growth. Mandating perpetual material growth on a planet with finite resources is a direct violation of the first law of thermodynamics, overriding any possibility of closed-loop materiality. These frameworks fail because they optimize for the appearance of progress on a corporate disclosure report, entirely bypassing the mechanical reality of the organization's engine. So, what ultimately happens to an unnatural system that continually extracts more energy than it returns? Because it lacks the internal architecture to sustain itself organically, it requires constant external coercion and the continuous collective belief of its participants just to persist. This chart visualizes the observer's collapse function, or OCF. It is a mathematical equation that predicts the precise fragility of an organization based on its dependency on human belief. Natural systems, like photosynthesis or the water cycle, persist completely independently of our opinions. But fiat currencies and extractive corporations only exist as long as observers agree they do. The higher the reliance on observer participation, the weaker the intrinsic stability. When the psychological coercion eventually fails and the participants withdraw their belief, the system crosses the mathematical threshold and the collapse function triggers. If an institution relies on extraction over symbiotic design, it is operating on borrowed time. It is fated to disintegrate the moment collective belief shatters. The defining task of the 21st century is no longer debating who owns the capital. The true task is managing our remaining natural capital in strict adherence to the physical laws of nature. Operating in alignment with these thermodynamic laws is not a theoretical experiment. Looking at these indigenous leaders, we are looking at the architects of systems that have already undergone 50,000 years of empirical testing, proving that biomimetic structures successfully persist without self-destructing. Ethics in system design are not a public relations initiative or a philosophical luxury. They are a mechanical, quantifiable mechanism for survival. We are faced with a strict mathematical binary. We can adopt nature's code to build distributed, closed-loop resilience, or we can continue to rely on extraction and force until the physics dictate our collapse. In nature, survival strictly favors the sustainable, and now we possess the mathematics to make that survival measurable.